You too can join the space rock revolution. Just send me your name, your track, a bit of a bio about yourself, and preferably a thumbnail or a video, and I'll get you on the show. Just send that to hadronconverter@gmail.com, or you can also message me on Facebook on Hadron Converter, or you could also leave a message with your links on hadronconverter.simplesite.com. I look forward to having you on the show and joining the space rock revolution. So last week, I had a bit to say about some of the famous sci-fi spaceships, and it was really only after attempting to collect some of those together that I realised how many there really were, that I could really fill more than an hour's program and all the great spaceships. And some of the ones I thought about, of course, the Heart of Gold from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was a great ship, if quirky, shall we say. Generally, everything went all right for the crew on board the ship. A bit on the irritating side sometimes, but what tended to happen outside the ship was rather chaotic. Many other ships too, but one that I got thinking about as well was the Jupiter 2 from Lost in Space. So I thought, I might have a look at some sci-fi shows, and to do them justice, well, I won't keep doing a running series of it because some of you might get bored by it, but over the last couple of years, any people who have been watching my posts have seen that, generally speaking, in the winter I do sci-fi night, and this year producing Hadron Converter's Space was an attempt to follow the same theme, I suppose, but to be able to concentrate on more on explaining things, I suppose, because I was very limited with doing the sci-fi night, in that I was just posting music posts and posting sci-fi films, and although I did have some people that were watching my posts, it wasn't a very sort of personalised thing. I did show at least one episode of Lost in Space, and I know on one of my own tracks I featured something inspired by Lost in Space called Space Bikers Rule OK, because they did have an episode where there were these hippie space bikers that got sent to their planet to demolish it. And that sort of led to all manner of adventures. Dr. Smith causing lots of problems from all concerned, as he always did. Lost in Space has got a very special place for me in sci-fi history, and my personal sci-fi history, because it was my first introduction to sci-fi. Back in those days, my father was studying part-time for university, and he was getting in the middle of his course, very complicated course for him, because he was studying electrical engineering, and there came the time where he realised that he had to devote more time to doing the course, or he just wasn't going to make it. And at the time, he was he completed an apprenticeship with the BMC company. They were producing British cars, Morrises, and the Mini Miners and things like that in Australia, later known as British Leyland. Oh, terrible cold lately. And it was getting to the point where he's just the double workload was too much for him. They weren't keen on giving him any time off or any assistance to further his studies, so he made the bold decision, one of several that he made in his lifetime that paid off for him, and quit work and concentrated on his studies, which meant there were some hard times ahead for our family. And my mother had to work part-time at night to try and keep the food on the table while my father went to university during the day and studied at night. So while he was at uni during the day, she was looking after me, and while he was studying of the evening, well, she was out working. And in order to keep me quiet, he used to read his books, and he'd have me sat on his knee and we'd watch TV. And one of the earliest TV shows that I can remember from those days. And they were for me, very good times, because there was a bit of personal time with my father, and I'd be sitting on his knee and watching Lost in Space. They tended to have a different American series each day of the week in Australia in those days. One night would be Lost in Space, one night would be Bewitched, one night would be I Dream of Jeannie, and there was also a British show called Z Cars that I used to like, and I actually might be one of the very few people in the world who can say that they actually liked My Mother the Car, which is a notorious dud series, but for me at that age, I must have been 2 or 3, I suppose, and the car with the talking radio was quite entertaining for me, even though the series itself never went into reruns or anything like that. But getting back to Lost in Space, I saw the pilot episode of that, probably the year that it came out. Australia used to get the American TV shows pretty early in those days. There wasn't much TV going on. TV was still in its early days in Australia, so there wasn't many shows, and there was a great demand for them. The earliest episode of Lost in Space, where they were all getting prepared for their mission to go out into space, and then Dr. Smith was giving them all a checkup and that, and a clean bill of health for the journey. It all seemed very real to me at that age, and Dr. Smith back then was a pretty evil character. He was a spy. The implication was that he might have something to do with the Russians or whatever. He was talking to someone on a two-way radio who wasn't answering, but he was quite a nasty character. I do believe he killed the security guard that was on the ship. Again, that wasn't quite clear, but he belted him on the back of the head and threw him in what in later episodes we found out to be the garbage disposal. So I'm guessing he came into a grisly end. And then of course all the chaos with the robot on deck. It was a rather scary experience watching that initial pilot episode of Lost in Space, and some of the earlier black and white episodes were also reasonably scary. There were, for a kid. There was one where they did find the planet to land on, which that tended to be the feature planet. Bore a remarkable resemblance to either Arizona or the back lot out there in Hollywood, but as a lot of these places do. A lot of these old series, there seems to be a formation of rocks that everyone in every series sort of goes through, and after a while there's this very familiar rock. It's like my own backyard because I've seen it in so many different shows. But they were on that planet, and John Robertson encountered a mask, and for whatever reason he put it on, and when he put the mask on, it possessed him, and he was gradually taking over the operations, and his personality, Professor Robertson's personality changed, and No one seemed to suspect that at first, except Will Robertson, and he followed John Robertson and found out that he was going to this place and communicating with this alien, and was discovered, and the alien was going to throw him off a cliff. And at the very sort of last minute, Will Robertson uh, asked that he look one more time at his father's face, and that was allowed. And when John Robertson removed the mask, Will Robertson tearily told him that he loved him, and John Robertson snapped out of it long enough to drop the mask down into a chasm. So love conquered the day at the end, and so in the early on episodes of the black and white episodes, I think it was probably aimed at the more adult audience, and as time went on, the show evolved. Dr. Smith ended up really stealing the show. They had a lot of unique features, I think, in the show, and it went on for reruns for quite a while in Australia. I'm just trying to remember when they finally did can the show, but it was one of those shows like Gilligan's Island that just never seemed to end. And even though it was entertaining at first, after a while, just getting rerun after rerun, and it was always on around about dinner time when I was a kid. So I got to the point where when I was into my teens, it was, oh no, not Lost in Space again. But with time, you sort of look back on it fondly, and in the subsequent series of the show, well, then they went to colour, which we didn't know at the time because we didn't have a colour TV until the late 70s. At least our family didn't. But in Australia, I think they brought colour TV out around about 1975. I remember it was a pretty big event because they actually set up tents in the local park and had TVs there, and they were showing the tennis and things like that. It was hard. There was really no colour TV shows available apart from sport to start with, so they were showing that. And I know my father went up there and he wasn't impressed because he said, "Well, what do I care about seeing the tennis in colour? I don't watch it in black and white." And it took a while before he was convinced that colour TV was a good move. And I suppose what finally convinced him was he had a black and white TV that he was using his engineering skills to always keep going, was always replacing valves and things like that. And somewhere along the line, he decided to build a bar at the bottom of the house because his effort at engineering had paid off well, and he'd managed to get himself a multi-story house, and the bottom floor of the place was ideal for him to set up a bar. So he wanted a stereo to play his music, so he moved the TV, which was a 3-in-1, had a radio, a radiogram and a TV in the one unit. So we moved those downstairs and bought a colour TV for upstairs. So we finally got colour TV. So that's when we realised that the later episodes of Lost in Space were in fact in colour. But for a while there, we were still watching a lot of black and white shows on colour TV because there just wasn't enough shows to go around. The Jupiter 2 was a great spaceship, really. It had all you needed to get you around. It was a bit of a bus, but a bit like some of the camper vans that people travel around in these days. You could travel in it. It wasn't overly manoeuvrable, but it did the job, and it was comfortable. And funnily enough, it seemed to have something in common with Doctor Who's TARDIS in that I think it always seemed to be bigger on the inside than it did on the outside. When you looked at pictures of the outside and you saw the floor plan, as in the picture that I'm looking at the moment, it didn't really look like it had a downstairs, but there was an elevator going downstairs, and you could go downstairs. And downstairs, there didn't really seem to be a hell of a lot there. They had the crew's sleeping quarters and a galley, and I think that was about it. But they always seem to have lots of stuff in later episodes. I know there was one episode where they set themselves up as a hotel and they had miles and miles of sports equipment. Whatever crazy thing that Dr. Smith and Will Robertson got up to in an episode, they always seem to have lots of equipment that they were able to pull out of a closet somewhere in the thing. And also the pod that not the pod, yeah, the pod. I think they called it the pod. Was their shuttlecraft. In later episodes, you saw there was a hatch bay and it came in and out of that, but it was never apparent where that might have fit in the ship. So they arranged their floor plan rather creatively. Another great feature of the show, of course, being the robot who yeah, he was one of the classic robots and quite a personality as well. So he had a good sense of humour. He was an entertainer. Seemed to be qualified in all sorts of things. He had circuits that made him a lawyer when he needed to be a lawyer, a doctor when he needed to be a doctor, as well as just the general other things that he was involved in. A lot of the alien characters were quite interesting as well. Usually there was a special guest alien in most episodes. I think Lost in Space was probably one of the first shows that had the concept of androids, which were humanoid-looking machines. They had quite a few episodes where the aliens were in fact androids. Some of the other, I suppose I should do a character breakdown, and of course you had John Robertson, who was the archetypal scientist, and he was also a man that I, as a boy, admired very greatly because I don't know, I made the association between him and my father being that he was a scientist and an engineer. Though I think it might have been that his specialty was geology or astrophysics. I'm not sure which, but he did have a sort of vague similarity in appearance to my father, and in many ways he was more like the ideal father because some of the mischief that Will Robertson got up to, he didn't get a good hiding like I did. He got this sort of reasonable father and son talk, which I thought would have been a nice option. His second in command was Major Don West, who was a pilot, and I think he was one of the unique as a pilot in that he was one of the worst navigators. The guy couldn't find his way through a revolving door without getting lost. He always tried hard. He was always seemed to be very confident in that, but he never managed to seem to find his way to Alpha Centauri or even to the next bus stop. He had quite a temper, especially when it came to Dr. Smith, and there was always this sort of tension that one day Major West would finally give Dr. Smith a good one in the nose, but I don't think it ever did really happen. He was always trying, and another way he was always trying was he had this romantic relationship with Judy, a beautiful blonde girl who was one of the Robertson children, though grown up. Of course, as well as that, you not in order of priority, I suppose, but you had Maureen Robertson, who was also the perfect, I suppose, 50s American wife. She was always there supporting her husband, obedient, putting the food on the table and keeping the household organised. But in the true Western tradition, if the men were away and the aliens came knocking on the door with evil intentions, she was right out there with the laser beams and that ready to defend the household, and pretty much in the mould, I suppose, of the American pioneer women who might have to see off a few Indians while their husband was out on the range. Penny Robertson was the number two child. She was the middle child. also had her quirks. So I think Judy Robertson didn't really get much of a chance to explore too much of her personality. She might have got one episode or two where she could sort of explore the characteristics of her side, but mostly she was a bit of a cutout figure that was just sort of there, always sort of basically someone for Don West to protect when the need came. But Penny Robertson did get to do quite a few episodes on her own as well, and might well have been a competition for the major character roles in the show. But of course, the show was very much dominated by the dreaded Dr. Smith for one, Will Robertson for two, the precocious child, also a child genius, played by Billy Mummy. He did really well playing the show. He was quite entertaining, and also later on in life, he had an interesting life. I'm not sure what the name of the band was, but later in the 60s and 70s, he was playing with some sort of a rock band in California, though I don't believe they were particularly successful. And then later on again, he did other roles in science fiction, most notably Babylon 5. He played one of the aliens in Babylon 5. And the robot himself, I really need to look up the name of the robot, because there was a name involved with the robot, but the robot was also a classic character. But I think it's fair to say that over most of the show, it did tend to revolve around the adventures of the robot, Dr. Smith, and Will Robertson, who sort of made like a three musketeer trio. Some of the other features of the show, I suppose, were the chariot. They did do a few adventures in the chariot, and off when the men had to go off scouting and that, well, they would take the chariot with them. The chariot was a tracked vehicle that they could travel around in, travel long distances. It was also amphibious. It could go over water, because there was one particular episode where they had to travel over water. I think they travelled in snow to start with, and it turned out they didn't realise that the planet they landed on had a highly elliptical orbit, and they'd left Dr. Smith and the robot behind because they couldn't trust them. I suppose that's one of the examples of very questionable judgment from Don West and John Robertson. If Dr. Smith was such an untrustworthy character, I think I would have brought him along, left the robot behind. But anyway, he realised that the planet was in an elliptical orbit, and he sent the robot along to warn them. And they assumed that it had come to kill them again, so they blasted it with the lasers, and it was only at the 11th hour that they found out that they were in trouble. But because of this elliptical orbit anyway, they travelled over snow and ice when they left, and then there was a period where the planet was approaching perihelion with the sun, and they had to take shelter underneath the chariot, and the whole place burnt up for a little while there because it was so hot. It cooled down enough for them to travel, and they realised they had to go back home, so they travelled back to the ship, and on the return trip they then found their way barred by a huge ocean, which they had to navigate across in the chariot. Fortunately for them, it was amphibious. There was some great alien characters appeared in the show. There was a guest appearance by Robbie the Robot, who I think would have to be my all-time favourite robot. Robbie the Robot, I think, first appeared in Forbidden Planet. He did get the odd role in many other films and advertisements. As I said, he was just a great robot, really well put together. And quite a robot of its times as well. He had a big glass bubble for a head, and a couple of rotating ring antenna, and when he spoke or thought, you could see electrical relays opening and shutting within the plexiglass head, which I thought was quite a novel feature, because back in those days, computers were very much in their infancy, and opening and shutting relays was one of the things that was done with very early computers. I think you'd have to go back to the British computers, like the Bletchley Park computer. I'm just trying to remember what it was called. It might have been ENIAC, but I think that used a paper tape drive and relays, so they were still sort of set in that mode. And the real computers of the day were huge affairs in buildings that might not have been using relays, but they weren't far off it. They were using valves, and they weren't very advanced compared to what we have today. And Robbie the Robot, anyway, was a very cool robot, and generally a good guy. But in Lost in Space, he played a bit of a bad guy. He managed to convince everyone, with Dr. Smith's help, that their robot was no good, and was superseded by Robbie the Robot. But Robbie the Robot was actually working for the aliens, and at the end of the day, there had to be a showdown between the Robbie the Robot and the Robinson's robot, which the Robinson's robot managed to win. Some other features of the show, I think Maureen Robertson, she did do her best to be the ultimate housewife in space, and some of the features that they showed, some of those things we sort of do have these days, or almost, I would say, but the concepts were funny. But they had something that looked a little bit like a microwave oven, that what it tended to do was provide pre-packaged meals that were often preheated, or sandwiches and wrappers that could be opened, and that was part of her skills as a housewife, to be able to push the right button to get those out. And I was also particularly entertained by the wash day. They showed washing day occasionally on the show, and washing day involved generally throwing all the dirty laundry into the washing machine, closing the lid and turning it on, and it'd make a high-pitched sound, similar to the sort of sounds you get from a theremin. And when the timer was up and it was finished, they'd take the clothes out, which were nicely packaged in plastic shrink wrap packages, ready to be put on again. And that was quite good. And aside from that, in later episodes, in order to keep their rations up, they were always growing things in the legendary hydroponic gardens that they had, and used to have an al fresco dinner outside the spaceship in later episodes as well. So she was always making me nice and comfortable for a great housewife. So I don't know where she'd sit with the modern feminist ideal, but at the time she was, probably pretty close to the ideal woman, I suppose. Alien spaceships, there was many, but very often they actually did sort of recycle ones. This picture is one that I think at least 3 or 4 episodes have played the hive ship of an alien entity that they inadvertently woke up. It was also a prison ship in another episode. There was also another episode where the computer was malfunctioning. That's where the robot used its skills as both a computer expert and as a doctor to to cure the computer. So in several episodes it was recycled. Other space vessels were often sort of characterizations of things that we have today, like the space bikers with their space motorbikes. I won't show that one. If you want to see that, look at Space Bikers Rule OK and by Hadron Converter, and you'll see that as the thumbnail. There was also an episode with a space cowboy and a space Mexican band, and that was a common type of ship that they used as well. It was a little bit like a cage where you got a plastic wrap appeared around it when it was ready to fly off in the atmosphere, and that appeared many times. And usually also when a spaceship took off, they showed an image where you could see like a rocket ship going up, and it didn't matter what the spaceship was. They often used that for the stock footage to show that they were taking off. There was also the huge ship that they had a character that was like a zookeeper that was collecting zoo specimens, and that was probably one of the more interesting ships that they showed that actually landed on the ground. Apart from that, they didn't have too many encounters with spaceships in space. They usually came a call and came visiting. And, some of the other things I think were good that you saw. There was John Robertson when he used to have to do a bit of scouting and surveillance, taking off with the rocket packs, which still challenge the imagination. Although there's still some people go around to air shows and things like that and fly one around, but the practicalities, of course, have never materialised in those things. I don't think the basic design has ever changed from the original attempts in the I think it was late 50s, early 60s. Limited by the fact that they can only provide so much thrust and so much weight, and the human body is just not an ideal aircraft. So they've never really done much more than brief flights for show expeditions. But of course, when John Robertson needed to fly around, do some surveillance, that's what he used. Picture there of the pod either entering or leaving the Jupiter 2, which was another bit of stock footage that we often saw in some of the episodes. And of course, Dr. Smith, he stole the show as before. Jonathan Harris, the third, I think it was, had a long and distinguished career. I don't think he ever went short of invitations to appear at shows or anything like that afterwards. He did appear in at least one episode of Get Smart, where he was quite entertaining as well as a diplomat come spy, and in a lot of shows during the 60s. I think he managed an appearance in Bewitched and a few other things, but he was quite the actor, and rather despicable character in Lost in Space. But I do believe from things I've heard, he was actually in real life a very nice man and well liked. And here a colour picture of the Jupiter 2 from the later colour days. Space looking a very interesting place, and of course some of the aliens, which there are many. And this shot here is interesting because it's a reprise shot with Billy Mummy and Jonathan Harris as older characters, and you can see how Billy Mummy has matured into a man, and you didn't quite get to see his face in Babylon 5 because he was always done up with the makeup as an alien. And These are the cryo tubes that the crew was supposed to use to freeze into their journey. There was a lot of inconsistencies with the script in the show because it was supposed to be a rather quick trip to Alpha Centauri, in which case they will use these freeze tubes, but they never made it to Alpha Centauri. They actually went quite a bit further because they went into hyperspace, and it just begs the question why they just didn't do it the easy way in the first place, considering they were able to travel around so readily in the vessel. So anyway, that's my brief roundup of, or maybe not so brief roundup of Lost in Space. As I said, for me, a seminal series because it was the start of a lifelong love of sci-fi and interest in space travel, from my point of view, which has never left me, and I still live to see the day when we freely travel in space. Anyway, I hope you like that little roundup. And a bit of space news this week. Elon Musk has launched his new Falcon Heavy rocket from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and it was successful with the launch, and the landing, I suppose you would say, was 2/3 successful. The one of the boosters crashed, but the other two landed themselves quite successfully, which is progress, of course. Really keeping an eye on Elon Musk. He seems to be a billionaire with an eye to the future, and there's too few of those. Someone who's got a bit of a vision for the future is something that we need in this day and age. And he also seems to have that quirky sense of humour, reminiscent of Richard Branson, I suppose, because he's another fellow that's rather a novel billionaire. But it's good to see that the launch vehicle makes us one step closer to the possibility of sending a mission to Mars, and certainly I think a further activity on the moon is right within the realms of possibility as well. I wouldn't mind seeing a permanent base on the moon rather than just the space station. I think we need to get out there everywhere, and the more places the better. I'm also hoping Elon Musk one day will think about the viability of Venus as a destination, because I do believe that Venus is far easier to reach than Mars, and actually, despite what it might seem on the surface, Venus is actually quite amenable to human colonisation in the clouds. So the cloud cities are quite a great possibility. Just floating cities would be a good thing. And I'm also hoping that Elon Musk will perhaps get into doing something with these EM drives. I mentioned the EM drives a couple of weeks ago on the show. They're an amazing piece of kit, and combined with the booster, the Falcon Heavy rocket booster, it makes it easily possible to send some sort of mission to Mars. I think you'd probably still have to do an assembly mission to do it, because with the Falcon Heavy rocket, I think we're talking about 64 tons capacity, and I remember them saying that to build a viable Mars spaceship powered by an EM drive, you're looking in the realms of 90 tons. So obviously it wouldn't be a direct launch from Earth, but it was never considered to be a direct launch from Earth thing. They were talking about shuttling between Earth and the vessel, and then using that to go to Mars. So when you think with the Falcon Heavy rocket being able to lift 64 tons, it's quite within the realms of possibility of of sending two halves of the ship up, assembling them in space, and then launching them from there. So hopefully he has a little bit of a think about that. But I'm really interested in Elon Musk, because he does seem to be someone who's got a vision of the future, and he's also basically say, come on, we reached the moon in the late 60s, and we've done nothing really since then. It's way time that we got to Mars. So I'm right behind him on that. I'd love to have him on the show one day, but I don't know if the budget will allow it. But it'd be certainly interesting to talk to someone like him, and the quirky sense of humour of sending an astronaut in a Tesla into a Mars intercepting orbit, with Space Oddity playing on a loop on the radio. Well, he's proved he's got a sense of humour, but he's also proving that Mars is a viable destination to go for with this Falcon Heavy by actually doing that, sending the car in orbit. Now, who knows? Maybe you'd be planning to recover it and get it back later. Yeah. So good work, Elon, and keep up. Let's get us out there into space. Well, as you can see, it's been a tough week, but we're hanging in there and doing battle with the forces of evil to bring you Hadron Converters Space next week. Hope to see you there.
Traveling at light speed, the time goes real slow. Stars come rushing with a weird blue glow. When you're traveling at light speed, people you know age just like the pyramids in the sand. Einstein, how did he know? Riding on a light beam on a train from Bird. It's better with warp drive. Nobody knows how fast you are, but it shows. Travel wherever in an episode. Only a Stargate is better in the shows. So give me a warp drive to travel the void, faster than the Klingon, surer than the Borg. I want a starship fitted with warp drive, faster than a light in distant stars nearby. Yeah.